Hello everybody and welcome. Our two next keynote sessions will give us a context of school bullying and violence in an East Asian context. And I'm very proud to introduce our next keynote speaker, Professor Hsi-Sheng Wei from the Department of Social Work at the National Taipei University in Taiwan. After this first keynote, Associate Professor Paul Horton will comment and reflect on Hsi-Sheng Wei's keynote here on site. Hsi-Sheng Wei is a PhD professor at National Taipei University in Taiwan. His research focuses on school bullying, juvenile delinquency, and youth development. During the past 20 years, he has systematically examined the characteristics of bullying behavior among Taiwanese youth and identified the risk factors of perpetration and victimization in multiple contexts. Dr. Wei's work also explored other kinds of child and adolescent maltreatment, such as student victimization by teachers, peer sexual harassment, and filicide suicide. More recently, he has looked into the intersectionality among childhood adverse experiences and school violence, as well as the developmental outcomes of victims. To integrate research and practice, Dr. Wei had been a consultant for the Ministry of Education's Anti-Bullying Safe Schools program, and we would like to welcome Hsi-Sheng Wei with a loud applause. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Hsi-Sheng Wei. I'm really delighted and honored to be with all of you here today from my home office. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of the World Anti-Bullying Forum for inviting me to speak on this important topic. It is truly a pleasure for me to be part of this conference, and thanks for holding such a wonderful event in the challenging time of COVID-19 pandemic. In my presentation, I'm going to introduce the issue of school bullying in Taiwan. I will first briefly talk about the historical context, how it became a public concern, and the governmental responses, what we know about it, also some reflections and future directions for research and practice. I am basing this talk on a review of the previous studies, specifically on Taiwanese youth. Now I'm going to show my slides on screen. Hope the findings that I share will be of interest to you and inspire more knowledge exchange and collaboration on this global issue. School bullying is a common issue across countries, but its concrete forms and public responses depend on the local context. Taiwan had been put under martial law for almost 40 years after World War II. School culture during this period was often restrictive and even hostile. Corporal punishment by the teachers was quite common, and students were segregated into different classes based on their academic performance. Passing the entrance exam was often the sole goal for students. School violence existed but was not regarded as a serious public health issue. After the martial law period ended in 1987, many people called for political, social, and educational reforms. Relevant legislations and policies had been initiated, and several core international human rights instruments such as CEDAW and CRC were given the status of domestic laws. Issues such as human rights and social equality was increasingly recognized by the public. In year 2000, a tragic school incident attracted wide public attention. A 9th grade student was bullied by his classmates because of his gender non-conformity. One day he went to the restroom during class but never returned. Some students later found him seriously injured and lying on the floor. He later died at the hospital. This incident elicited much discussion on the issue of gender diversity and school safety for marginalized students, which led to the passing of Gender Equity Education Act in 2004. This year is the 21st anniversary of the incident, and the school remodeled the restroom. You can see a symbol of rose by the men's room in memory of him. The Gender Equity Education Act is an important policy tool to protect students from gender-related harassment and bullying in school. It requires the establishment of a gender equity education committee in every school to investigate the incidents as well as ensure a safe and friendly learning environment for all students. Gender equity curriculum are also implemented in primary and secondary schools. Given the increased public awareness and governmental efforts, gender-related bullying is still prevalent today. According to a recent online survey of over 1,000 LGBTQ+ youth aged 13 to 21, over 60% of the students have suffered verbal harassment in school during the past year due to their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Many respondents feel unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation or gender expression. Also, almost 70% had heard school teachers or staff making homophobic remarks. Of those harassed or bullied, 55% said they never reported the incidents to school. As the literature clearly suggests, being bullied can have lasting psychosocial impact on the victims. A study of 500 gay or bisexual young men aged 20 to 25 showed that those who suffered homophobic bullying during childhood reported more depression, anxiety, and physical pain in emerging adulthood than non-victims. Victimization experience was also associated with higher risk of suicidal ideation and attempted suicide. Although school bullying is not a new phenomenon, it has only become a social concern in the past 20 years in Taiwan. Some local NGOs began to publish survey reports on student victimization from early 2000s. And the Mandarin term 霸凌 was first introduced from the English word bully to refer to the act of aggression towards school peers. In 2010, a series of violent incidents at a local junior high school received wild media coverage, and public calls for governmental response grew more and more stronger. The Ministry of Education eventually issued regulations governing prevention and control of bullying on campus in 2012. This document serves as the official guideline for anti-bullying practice in all primary and secondary schools in Taiwan. It provides a definition of school bullying and sets a protocol for reporting and investigating the incidents. Schools are also expected to implement bullying prevention measures. In its latest version last year, articles regarding cyberbullying and teacher-to-student bullying were added in order to better reflect the local reality. So, how often are Taiwanese students bullied in school? A recent national survey showed that among the junior high school respondents, about 35% had ever been ridiculed in the face during the past semester. About 12% were intentionally isolated by peers, and 13% had been hit, kicked, or pushed. Regarding the perpetration rates, a survey of junior high school students in a metro area found that when behavioral items of bullying was used for assessment, about 39% of the respondents had ever bullied other students physically, while 53% had verbally bullied others during the past semester. In another survey of grades 7 to 12 students with a general definition of bullying, the self-reported prevalence of bullies, victims, and bully/victims were 10.9%, 10.7%, and 5.5% respectively. Unlike many other countries, students in Taiwanese primary and secondary schools typically stay with a fixed group of classmates for the whole school year, and therefore they are more likely to be bullied by classmates than by people outside class. Past research in Taiwan had confirmed that bullying victimization was associated with a variety of problems such as anxiety, depression, somatic symptoms, lower self-esteem, reduced school attachment, internet addiction, and suicidal ideation. These findings are in line with previous studies conducted in other countries. Although the magnitude of association may be different, as cross-national comparisons reveal. Who are likely to be the victims of school bullying in Taiwan? As the literature suggests, students who deviate from the group norms or suffer stigma from the dominant culture are often at risk of being bullied by peers. For example, a study of over 6,000 fourth grade students found that children with asthma, allergy, and epilepsy reported higher frequencies of peer victimization. Those who take daily medications or receive treatment were also at a higher risk of being victimized. Interestingly, diabetes and obesity was not found to be associated with peer victimization in that study. We can adapt an ecological framework to examine the risk factors of bullying victimization on individual, family, school, and community level. Through a series of studies, we identify some of the significant factors among Taiwanese youth. Social withdrawal was associated with peer victimization, and children who suffer maltreatment by parents and teachers were more likely to be bullied. On the community level, poor quality of community environment and higher criminal activities in neighborhoods increase the likelihood of bullying victimization. In addition to the above factors, peer relationship has been suggested as crucial in school bullying. Bullying is often embedded in peer social networks. As we mentioned earlier, students in Taiwan stay with a same group of classmates every day throughout their school years, which makes peer dynamics particularly influential in the local context. In a study following over 200 Taiwanese junior high school students from grades 7 to 9, we collected 5 waves of social network data and find that being identified by peers as victims predicted later victim status, while having friends helped to reduce victimization over time. However, given the benefits of friendship, sometimes children may actually be bullied by their friends. In another study, we find that bullies and victims nominated each other as friends in 8% of the cases of verbal bullying and about 12% of physical bullying incidents. Another 8% of victims nominated the bully as a friend, with 9% and 12% of the bullies nominating their victims as friends in verbal and physical bullying cases. Regarding the risk factors of bullying perpetration, Depression and delinquency were found associated with children's bullying behavior in Taiwan. Parental substance use, physical and psychological neglect and abuse, witness of family violence, and PTSD were also positively associated with bullying perpetration among local youth. Again, teachers' maltreatment was found related to students' bullying tendency. Although psychological distress was identified as a risk factor of bullying perpetration, existing findings on bullies' adjustment are quite mixed, which raised the possibility of heterogeneity within the bullies. In a series of analyses, we find that some students' bullying is more calculative and goal-oriented in nature, and they are able to avoid the negative consequences of aggression, such as peer rejection and victimization. These results echo the distinction between pure bully and bully/victim in the literature. Given the prevalence of bullying in Taiwanese schools, the government has adapted several strategies for prevention and intervention. First of all, moral education, life education, human rights, and gender equality are assigned as mandatory curriculum in primary and secondary schools. Second, two national school bullying surveys per year are conducted for all students in grades 5 to 12, one anonymous and the other not. Third, governmental subsidies are provided for selected schools to implement anti-bullying programs. Finally, restorative mediation is promoted as the major intervention practice. Training workshops are held island-wide, and guidelines manuals are distributed. Although the public awareness of school bullying has been raised significantly and national policies have been implemented, the rapid advance of digital technology poses new challenges for students and schools. A large-scale survey last year showed that about 12% of the boys and 40% of the girls in primary schools had experienced cyberbullying, while the numbers were about 30% and 18% in junior high schools. Another analysis of the same dataset showed that 10% of the respondents reported that someone had tried to get them talk about sex online when they didn't want to. 6.4% had been asked unwanted personal questions online, such as what your body looks like or sexual things you have done. And 3.5% of youth had been asked to do something sexual that they didn't want to do. An incident happened last week in Taiwan, further illustrated the online violence faced by today's youth. A YouTuber was arrested for using young women's face images to create and distribute deepfake porn videos online. Similarly, more and more students are abusing these technologies to harass and assault their peers digitally. To ensure a safe and friendly online environment for everyone will be a difficult task for educators, helping professionals, and policymakers alike. Following the public concern and academic interest, our knowledge on school bullying in Taiwan has grown rapidly in the past 20 years. Its impact on youth development has been increasingly appreciated, and actions have been taken to respond to this important issue. So where do we go from here? First, more research on the victim population is called for. Special attention should be paid to the marginalized groups, such as indigenous youth, children from immigrant families, LGBTQ+, students with special needs, and so on, as well as the underlying social discrimination and structural oppression. Second, constant review and update of policies and legislations are needed in order to address new forms of peer harassment and aggression. Finally, the design and implementation of the anti-bullying strategies are often not evidence-based, and their outcomes are not properly evaluated. There are actually findings to question the effectiveness of some current programs, which highlights the need of more evaluation efforts. From the Ye Yongzhi incident in year 2000 to today, there have been much progress made in Taiwan regarding human rights, gender equality, and social justice. Same-sex marriage was legalized 2 years ago here, and we are proud to be the first Asian country to do so. Still, there are lots of work ahead. In this time of globalization, we share many common challenges with other countries. And I believe that by working together, we can better address the issue of school bullying and create a safe and friendly environment for all children to grow and learn. This forum is a great example of facilitating mutual understanding and collaboration among researchers and practitioners around the world. I appreciate you all very much, and thank you again for including me in this wonderful event.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And thank you also, Paul Horton, for joining me here and to comment a little bit on the keynote we all have just experienced. Hsi-Sheng Wei is not available for questions, so that's why we also are arranging it like this. So we have asked you to comment and reflect on this keynote also because you did your ethnographic field work in field studies in Vietnam, and you published your dissertation, School Bullying and Power Relations in Vietnam. So I think that gives also a little bit of context why we invited you to comment on this wonderful presentation. What important points do you take away from this keynote?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for asking me to participate. It's an honor to be able to comment on such a good keynote. In terms of your question, there's a lot in this keynote. So in thinking about what sort of points to raise, I think I focus on this with prevalence and consequences of homophobic bullying. And research has pointed to this in other contexts as well, so not just in the East Asian context, also in the Swedish context, for example. And that homophobic bullying is a key stressor, and how that relates to minority stress more generally, and why those consequences are more severe. And LGBTQ plus youth are at more risk of suicidal ideation and so on. And I think that idea of minority stress is raised really well by Hsi-Sheng in terms of this finding that 68.5% of these young people had heard teachers or staff making homophobic comments. And research has shown like the importance of teachers in this problem. But also it would be nice to know in terms of media depictions and so on in that context. Because I see a lot of similarities with the Vietnamese context, both in terms of LGBTQ rights and so on. And also in terms of this gender equity education and this act that came in. Because in my own research with young LGBTQ plus youths, which I did after my PhD research, I talked to young people who experienced suicidal ideation or whose friends had committed suicide. And one of the things that they were really emphasizing was the need to bring in curriculum to raise these issues, to discuss these issues, but also legislation. They saw that as the important first step. And they talked about the feeling of thinking that they were the only one. So this existential anxiety about, they're the only ones going through this. So I think that's a really important first step.
Yeah.
So that's some main points.
Some of the, yeah. And I also think that this follows a very similar pattern. Something horrible happens, and then society reacts. Someone is killed or died or suicidal, and then legislation comes in place, and there is a lot of attention to the area. And I think that is, in a way, also very, very sad that should have to happen over and over again in different places. We just gave the Lifetime Achievement to Donald Weo's daughters, and that was the same experience from Norway in Bergen, also when 2 boys committed suicide related to bullying, and that started something. So I think it's just something that strikes me, and I also appreciate a lot that the LGBTQ, he addresses that, and the homophobic bullying and gender equality issues. So can you say a little bit about the suggested future directions that he also ends the presentation with?
Yeah, I think he makes a really good point about the focus on these different minority groups like LGBTQ, for example, and to actually there needs to be more research around that. And not only in the Taiwanese context, in the Swedish context, in other contexts, but also in terms of these ecological factors that he points to. And I think that can be developed even more to consider. I can speak from the Vietnamese context. So, for example, media depictions, how transgender people are portrayed in the media in these particular contexts. And how that relates to dominant norms. He referred to dominant norms and beliefs in the culture. So it would be interesting to know in the specific context what form that takes in terms of, for example, Taoism, Confucianism, which is quite similar in the Vietnamese context, and how that influences ideas of who is different, who doesn't fit into this hot and cold idea of males and females.
Thank you very, very much. Let's give a round of applause for Paul for coming here and comment. Thank you very, very much. And